How do we accumulate emotional clutter? What kinds of places does it come from? That's what this episode is about. You're listening to Pure Light, where we explore how you can believe in yourself and be happy with who you are. My name is Ailey. I'm a coach, writer, and yoga and meditation teacher. This is episode 141. In the last episode, I talked about how sometimes we try to ignore our feelings and only allow ourselves to experience the ones that we like. So we try to avoid experiencing the ones that we don't like. And this may be intentional or unintentional. And the ones that we don't allow ourselves to experience, or the ones that we don't process, contribute to emotional clutter. I talked about emotional clutter in a much earlier episode in this podcast. I think it was episode 20, about how when we don't process our emotions, we limit our capacity for joy, because that energetic space is filled with the ones that we don't want to deal with. So it's that those unwanted emotions are taking up that space. So one type of emotional clutter is based on our individual experience. It's based on the things that happen in our lives that we're unable to process emotionally for whatever reason. For example, if there's something traumatizing that happens that's totally overwhelming, that may lead to someone shutting down. There may be a lot of pain there that may require therapy or other healing modalities to help the person process it. So the first type of emotional clutter is individual, so it's based on our experience of life. The second type of emotional clutter is inherited, and that's based on the groups and communities and lineages that we're a part of or that we identify with. I want to share a moment from 2004. So I'm standing on a stage wearing Estonian clothing, this white embroidered blouse and a thick wool skirt that's vertically striped. I'm standing on like a concrete riser and packed in there. So there's 3 people per step. Each step is maybe 3 feet deep. And there's people, right next to each other. So it's pretty crowded. And we're all singing. So I'm standing there trying to hold the music in front of me while keeping my elbows in. So kind of like peeking down and trying to see what the next words are. We've been on the stage on and off for a couple days. I'm in the soprano section. My mom's there too in another section. In the exact same outfit, actually, the same Estonian folk clothing. And people around me have tears streaming down their faces. And I don't. I feel like I need to have a breakdown, but I'm not allowing myself to have it. Like it feels like there's a block in my heart, this heavy energy on my chest. And there's this sadness and grief that's part of that. And I don't feel like I have the capacity to deal with it. It feels like it's much bigger than me. And at the same time as I can feel all of that, I can also feel that there's immense joy beyond that pain that I don't have access to because I can't deal with the sadness. So that was when I first attended the Estonian Song Festival. So that was 2004. My family is from Estonia on both sides. My dad was actually born there. Estonia declared independence in 1918, but they were not able to maintain it. There were a number of occupations after that declaration of independence in 1918. So there was a Soviet occupation, then there was a German occupation, then a Soviet reoccupation. And when I was born, Estonia was part of the Soviet Union, not by choice, but as a result of those occupations. I was born in Canada, and I grew up in the Estonian community in Toronto, which included things like Estonian school, camps, guides. My piano teacher was Estonian. So I was constantly immersed in Estonian culture. I learned the language, I learned the songs, I learned some of the folk dances and some of the history. And whenever there was a celebration of any kind, I could feel both the pride and reverence the community had towards its homeland, as well as the heaviness associated with the pain of having their independence being stolen from them. And for many of them, having to escape in order to survive. Because there was this sadness and anger and grief. And since I was born in Canada, I personally didn't experience having to flee from Estonia to escape for my own survival. My grandparents did during World War II. My dad was a baby at the time, so he also had that experience, although it's probably beyond what he can remember. So that song festival that I was singing in was something that started back in 1869. And it's something that Estonians used to maintain their national sense of identity and to keep up their spirit throughout the times when they were not independent, which go back even beyond the occupations that I mentioned. Estonia sang their way to freedom. There's a documentary about this called The Singing Revolution that shares the story of how Estonia restored their independence using singing as a non-violent revolution to overthrow a very violent occupation until they eventually regained their independence in 1991. So the first time I participated in the song festival was in 2004, that year that I just described, the year that I was there singing with my mother and with 22,000 other people on stage. The next time I was there was 10 years later in 2014, singing with 33,000 other people, which incidentally was also the year that I was doing my Kundalini yoga teacher training. So in 2014, when I was there for the second time, I went there with the intention to clear my Estonian emotional clutter. So I was ready to be open and allow that pain to flow through me. I was actually like, bring it on. Like I was totally prepared to have a breakdown on that stage in that crowd, surrounded by other Estonians, some of whom participated in the singing revolution. So I'm standing on the stage pretty much in the same way as I was in 2004. So in my Estonian traditional folk clothing, trying to hold up my notes without elbowing anyone. And curious to see how things unfold, like wondering at what point the breakdown is going to happen. And it never came. All I can feel is the love and the joy. So that pride, that sense of belonging, and also that sense of like, wow, I come from a really courageous and peaceful group of people. My eyes fill with tears, but they're tears of gratitude. Gratitude for the strength and the courage of my ancestors, and for the fact that I even exist, which in that moment I realized was a total miracle. And the only reason that I'm able to feel all of that is because I have processed my Estonian emotional clutter. And that's something that I didn't realize until that moment. And that's not to say that I'll never have sadness or grief or even anger again related to the history of Estonia and some of the things that my people went through. It just means that the heaviness of that is no longer with me. It's not something that I keep holding on to. And it's not something that's driving my actions or reactions. Because when I had that heaviness with me as part of my energetic field, I could feel myself being triggered every time I met a Russian person. Because I think at some level, I blamed them for that pain, for that fear, for that anger, for that sadness, for that grief. And it's funny to think about all this now because in retrospect, it actually makes sense that I had cleared my Estonian emotional clutter. Because I remember meeting someone at a yoga course. This was in 2011. So almost a decade ago now. And this person was Russian. And it was the first opportunity that I had where I noticed the absence of that inner reaction when I met someone Russian. So the absence of that fear, that anger, that grief, or that sense that I kind of needed to be on high alert around this person. Like that was totally gone. Because I was no longer blaming them for the heaviness inside of me. Eckhart Tolle has talked a lot about that unprocessed, accumulated emotional clutter. He calls it the pain body. So the pain body is basically the same thing that I've been calling emotional clutter. I want to share a quote from his book, A New Earth. It doesn't really matter what proportion of your pain body belongs to your nation or race, and what proportion is personal. In either case, you can only go beyond it by taking responsibility for your inner state now. Even if blame seems more than justified, as long as you blame others, you keep feeding the pain body with your thoughts and remain trapped in your ego. That's from page 159 of A New Earth. And I want to be clear about something here. This has nothing to do with holding groups responsible for acts of evil or injustice or creating trauma. That's another piece of the healing puzzle in this conversation. There are things that need to happen in our world in terms of legal actions and social justice movements to put structures into place so that this type of thing doesn't continue to happen to the groups and identities that are continually at risk. The piece of the puzzle that I'm talking about in this episode is learning to accept the inner discomfort instead of running away from it. So for me, it was learning to feel that heaviness and work through that for myself emotionally instead of wanting to blame Russians for it. So this is about healing at the individual level and taking responsibility for how we feel. Because when we do that, that's how we have the power to change how we feel and to clear that emotional clutter or to let go of that pain body. So some of the emotional clutter we have isn't based on stuff we've experienced. It's based on stuff that the people around us have experienced. And we can feel it whether or not we've had that experience ourselves or not, because it's like an energetic quality. It's something that's kind of part of our aura. There's more to come on this. Stay tuned. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, may you be guided by your light.